On May 11, 1979, an elderly lady of 66 passed away from cardiac arrest inside her Beverly Wilshire hotel room over in Los Angeles. Bedridden during her last few months, she lacked the strength to even stand. Cluttered around her were partially empty Coca-Colas and piles of novels people doubted she even read. Her actual passing made practically zero headlines. 10 folks attended her burial. A certain writer eventually claimed she only had $3,500 left, though close acquaintances heavily debated that exact sum. This was Barbara Hutton, someone who possessed a fortune of roughly $50 million by the time she turned 21. That massive wealth, scraped together from the spare change of working-class citizens, took her grandfather, Frank Winfield Woolworth, his entire existence to build. Barbara blew through the whole thing in about 40 years, marrying 7 different husbands. A pair of them held royal prince titles, alongside a count, a baron, a foreign ambassador, a painter, plus the iconic Cary Grant. Out of those 7 spouses, 6 managed to walk away holding massive chunks of her money. Grant was the sole partner who didn't take a dime. Tabloids relentlessly dubbed her the poor little rich girl, framing it as a cruel joke. Ultimately, though, that nickname served as a tragic epitaph. What follows is the tale of how America's greatest shopping empire got completely torn apart, breaking down vow by vow, revealing how somebody with enough cash to purchase the globe remained unable to acquire her true desire. Chapter 1. The Woolworth Empire. The visionary behind this massive dynasty completely abandoned his formal education immediately after turning 16. Arriving on April 13, 1852, Frank Winfield Woolworth grew up on a modest rural property near Rodman in New York's Jefferson County. His folks, Fanny and John, lived as strictly religious Methodists, farming the soil, raising 2 sons despite facing severe poverty and limited opportunities. Frank despised manual agricultural chores. Ever since he was young, he constantly bragged to anyone paying attention about his dream of becoming a merchant. His major breakthrough finally happened in 1873, after smoothing talking his way into a free internship working for Augsbury and Moore, which was a local dry goods business situated in neighboring Watertown. Everyone basically agreed he possessed atrocious retail skills, acting incredibly clumsy around shoppers, failing at price negotiations, and ultimately suffering wage reductions once sales tanked. Yet he noticed a crucial detail that veteran clerks completely overlooked. Store inventory remained hidden inside cabinets or blocked by glass cases. Buyers were forced to request assistance simply to inspect the products. Woolworth considered this counterproductive. He firmly believed products needed to market themselves. His big break arrived during 1878. The shop was holding on to excess stagnant stock, prompting Woolworth to persuade management to let him display everything openly on tables, so patrons could handle items without barriers. Each piece cost exactly 5 cents. The collection totally sold out at an unbelievable pace. Woolworth immediately envisioned his ultimate destiny. Securing a $300 loan, he launched a 5-cent shop in Utica, New York during February 1879. It went bankrupt within weeks. Most guys would have quit right there, but not Woolworth. Several months down the line, he established another location in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, scaling up his original business model by introducing 10-cent merchandise. That Lancaster operation became a massive hit and permanently transformed the nation's shopping landscape. The underlying strategy seemed entirely straightforward. Clear prices on open shelves let folks physically inspect the goods without any employee hovering nearby. Buying wholesale shipments straight from the factories entirely eliminated the middleman. Whatever Woolworth lacked in charisma, he completely offset through fierce operational productivity. He aggressively negotiated dirt-cheap supplier rates, handed over hard currency up front, and kept a tyrannical grip on all storefront operations. Come 1889, he successfully managed 12 booming branches. The dawn of 1900 brought that number to 59. Once he consolidated alongside 4 competing brands to establish the F.W. Woolworth Company in 1911, The conglomerate boasted 596 storefronts nationwide. Yet Frank craved far more than mere commercial supremacy. He craved a permanent legacy. The Metropolitan Life Insurance Company just finished erecting a 700-foot skyscraper bordering Madison Square, effectively claiming the title of Earth's highest structure. Rumor had it that Metropolitan Life previously rejected his early funding request, leaving him holding a bitter grudge for years. He directly instructed his designer, Cass Gilbert, to build his tower 50 feet taller than the Metropolitan. Gilbert absolutely delivered. The Woolworth Building, a stunning neo-Gothic masterpiece at 233 Broadway downtown, soared 792 feet straight into the clouds. Woolworth funded the full $13.5 million construction in cash. During its grand reveal in April 1913, President Woodrow Wilson flipped a switch from Washington that lit up exactly 80,000 bulbs across the exterior walls. This skyscraper skyrocketed Woolworth into legendary status, though New York's upper-crust elite continued viewing him as a common store clerk. New York's elite society completely rejected a guy who built his massive wealth by peddling cheap trinkets to blue-collar workers. That snub absolutely ate away at him. He practically forced his 3 girls into weddings designed to buy them the high society status he was denied. Despite terrible toothaches, he stubbornly refused to visit a dentist, a foolish move that ultimately killed him. On April 8, 1919, Frank Winfield Woolworth passed away from blood poisoning caused by that ignored tooth issue. He was 66, leaving behind roughly $76 million. His booming enterprise ran well over 1,000 retail spots, and all that massive cash had practically zero legal safeguards. One of his grandkids, a 7-year-old girl named Barbara, eventually inherited a full third of it. Chapter 2. The Loss of a Mother. Barbara Woolworth Hutton was born in New York City on November 14, 1912. Her mom, Edna, was the middle child of Frank Woolworth's 3 girls. Her dad, Franklin Laws Hutton, was a top partner at his brother Edward's big investment brokerage, E.F. Hutton & Company. He was a good-looking, super-connected guy who basically cared about nothing except having a great time. Their marriage was completely miserable right from the start. Frank Woolworth tried hard to stop the wedding, only giving in once his first grandkid was born. Franklin drank hard and openly flaunted his side pieces. Edna, feeling totally isolated and embarrassed, supposedly started a secret romance of her own with a guy named Bud Bouvier. He was the baby brother of John Vernon Bouvier, whose son would eventually become Jacqueline Kennedy's dad. That Upper East Side mansion was filled with extreme luxury, dead silence, and constant betrayal on both sides. Barbara spent her toddler years raised by a revolving door of nannies and tutors. Her folks were barely ever together, and when they were, the tension was absolutely toxic. On May 2, 1917, 4-year-old Barbara actually discovered her mom's lifeless body. Edna Woolworth Hutton passed away at just 33. Officially, she suffered a fatal airway blockage from mastoiditis, a nasty infection right inside the skull. The medical examiner completely ruled out a post-mortem exam, but pretty much nobody actually bought that weak excuse. Word on the street was always that Edna drank something lethal after catching her husband messing around yet again. According to writer C. David Heyman, the rich family allegedly bribed city cops to stop any real investigation. The newspapers claimed a housemaid found her dead, but Heyman wrote that little Barbara was actually the one. It's basically impossible to guess what a tiny 4-year-old actually processed about that terrible sight. What's totally clear is that this trauma split her life right down the middle. All the stuff that followed, the string of divorces, the reckless spending, the deep trust issues with supposed lovers, all stemmed right back to that fateful morning. Franklin Hutton absolutely failed to step up as a real parent after his wife passed away. He just kept hitting the bottle, kept seeing other women, and couldn't care less about raising his kid. For a while, Barbara crashed with her aunt, Marjorie Merriweather Post, the serial heiress married to Franklin's brother, Edward. Marjorie's kid, a girl named Nedaniah, who grew up to be Hollywood actress Dina Merrill, vividly remembered Barbara living with them after her dad totally bailed. That setup didn't last long, though. Barbara got shipped off to her grandparents' massive Long Island estate. Winfield Hall was a crazy 30,000-square-foot marble mansion in Glen Cove that cost a whopping $9 million. Barbara hung out totally alone in those giant rooms. She ate super formal, quiet meals in a huge Georgian dining hall meant for massive parties. Her grandma, Jenny, was dealing with what her doctors basically labeled as early-onset dementia. She just sat around all day in a white wicker rocker being watched by a nurse, totally incapable of keeping up a basic chat. In June 1918, Frank Woolworth legally petitioned the courts to declare his wife completely out of her mind. He was fading himself, super paranoid, depressed, and pulling away, but he was always sweet to Barbara. He called her princess and totally spoiled her with everything money could buy. She wrote about him later with genuine love, recalling that he was always a bit weird, but incredibly gentle with her. When Frank Woolworth passed away in April 1919, Barbara lost the absolute only grown-up who truly cared about her. She was just 6. After that, she got bounced around between family members, and none of them wanted the real hassle of raising a kid. She went to Miss Hewitt's classes in Manhattan, then hit Miss Porter's school up in Farmington, Connecticut. She grew into a super shy kid who practically never hung out with anybody her own age. Her one and only true buddy was her first cousin, Jimmy Donahue. He was 3 years younger, the kid of her aunt, Jessie Woolworth Donahue, and he also banked a solid chunk of the Woolworth cash. Right off the bat, they shared a deep bond. Both grew up rich, ignored, and basically had to raise themselves. As for Jimmy, he turned out wild and flashy, burning through cash and booze until a fatal mix of liquor and barbiturates claimed his life at 51. The overarching theme that eventually shaped Barbara's entire existence, deep solitude hidden beneath extreme wealth and flashy displays, had firmly set in before she even reached age 10. Chapter 3. The $1 Million Baby. Back in 1924, Barbara's grandmother, Jenny Woolworth, passed away. Her will established a massive trust fund for her granddaughter, holding roughly $26 million. Another $2 million in shares from Edner's distinct estate formed a secondary trust, with Franklin Hutton managing them both. He might have been a terrible parent, but Franklin truly had a knack for growing money. Right before the 1929 Wall Street crash, he cashed out the riskiest assets, dodging the massive financial hits that devastated the other Woolworth relatives. Once Barbara celebrated her 21st birthday in November of 1933, her nest egg had swelled to about $42 million, plus another $8 million from her mother. Adjusted for inflation, that stash easily tops $1 billion today. This made Barbara Hutton one of the richest females on the entire planet, despite never attending a grown-up dinner party. She officially entered high society 3 years before receiving her total fortune. To mark her 18th birthday in November 1930, her family threw her a lavish coming-out party at New York's Ritz-Carlton Hotel. The bash cost $60,000. With countless citizens struggling just to buy groceries, this massive celebration was incredibly out of touch. The exact details made things worse. 4 live bands played till dawn, while 200 waiters delivered 1,000 7-course midnight meals, followed by 1,000 morning feasts. They popped open 2,000 bottles of champagne. Maurice Chiolier welcomed everyone wearing a Santa suit, and Rudy Vallee played a set. As favors, attendees grabbed tiny velvet boxes stuffed with loose diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and sapphires. Elite names like the Astors and Rockefellers mingled inside, completely oblivious to the massive soup kitchen lines wrapping around the nearby streets. The public outrage was swift and brutal. Papers printed the massive party bill right beside photos of local soup kitchens. Gossip writers went straight for Barbara's throat, treating her like the mastermind rather than just the guest of honor. In reality, she was only 18 and had essentially grown up isolated in strict academies. She hadn't organized any of it, yet angry citizens completely blurred the lines between an innocent teenager and the massive financial empire dictating her life. This exact moment sparked the infamous media nickname that labeled her the poor little rich girl. That phrase wasn't exactly brand new. Noel Coward penned a track with that heading back in 1925, and Mary Pickford headlined a 1917 movie using the same title, yet the moniker attached itself to Barbara in a vicious way, haunting her forever. Even musicians jumped on the bandwagon. Harry Warren crafted a track called "I Found a $1 Million Baby in a 5 and 10 Cent Store," featuring lyrics by Billy Rose and Mort Dixon. It blew up the charts in 1931, and everyone knew who inspired it. Meanwhile, poet Ogden Nash twisted her struggles into comedic rhymes for public amusement. Franklin Hutton shipped his daughter to Europe to escape the relentless backlash. It was supposed to be a quick getaway. Ultimately, though, Barbara basically left for good. For the next 50 years, she basically hopped from one overseas estate to another, bouncing between London, Paris, Venice, Tangier, and countless other spots, deliberately staying far from the nation that built her family's empire, only to rip her apart for simply receiving the payout. Amidst all the drama, practically no one realized that Barbara actually wrote. Ever since her academy days, she had been quietly crafting verses, a deeply personal hobby contradicting the massive, flashy circus her everyday existence had become. During 1934, she quietly released a tiny poetry collection titled The Enchanted, using the alias Barbara Umani, pressing only 200 physical books. Her second piece, The Wayfarer, followed closely in 1957. She shared both books exclusively with close friends and her immediate family. Years later, at her memorial service, Hollywood star Cliff Robertson recited one of those pieces. It remained an incredibly rare instance where Barbara Hutton received real praise for her own original work. Chapter 4. The Marrying Medavanis. The Medavani clan reached the West completely broke, carrying only a wild backstory. Their dad, General Zachary Medavani, supposedly worked under the Russian Tsar until the revolution violently booted the crew from their native Georgia. Those 5 kids, making up 3 boys and 2 girls, escaped to French territory first, eventually crossing into America following the 1921 Soviet takeover. Back in their native Georgia, the family held Ari status, a minor nobility without actual titles. Yet, as they traveled across oceans, they somehow drastically exaggerated their social standing. Once hitting the New York and Paris scenes, the siblings started presenting themselves as actual royalty. Nobody bothered checking. Whatever royal blood they lacked, they completely compensated for with cunning. Every single sibling hitched themselves to money or celebrity. Serge, the oldest, wed actress Pola Negri, ditching her when the 1929 market collapse wiped out her bank account. Meanwhile, the second oldest sibling, Alexis, tied the knot with Louise Astor Van Allen, Mrs. William Astor's great-granddaughter, and actually a buddy of Barbara Hutton. Newspapers coined a catchy nickname, the Marrying Medavanis. However, his sister Rusi was the mastermind behind the upcoming scheme. During the sunny months of 1932, while vacationing with Alexis, Louise, Barbara, and Russi down in San Sebastian, Spain, the sisters secretly orchestrated a highly scandalous trap for Barbara and Alexis. She perfectly coordinated Louise and several onlookers to walk in right when Alexis had her cornered. Totally mortified, Barbara fled to Paris. Russi followed immediately. She threatened to leak the embarrassing setup unless the heiress married Alexis. Paralyzed by fear of the tabloids, the 20-year-old completely caved. The two exchanged vows on the 22nd of June, 1933, at a Parisian Russian Orthodox cathedral. Her dad handed over a massive $1 million. A major New York tabloid sarcastically applauded the bride for blowing working-class American cash on an overseas guy whose identity they had already forgotten. Right after tying the knot, the groom straight up insulted his brand-new wife by calling her overweight. At the time, she stood 5'4" and weighed exactly 148 pounds. She immediately launched into an extreme starvation routine, surviving strictly on plain dark roast coffee for uninterrupted weeks. Within just a few months, she rapidly shed 40 pounds. That cruel remark sparked a lifelong eating disorder. Meanwhile, their relationship was just a calculated business deal dressed up as romance. The new husband blew cash freely on a lavish Parisian home, a fleet of polo horses, tailored suits, and personal jewelry. He basically treated her trust fund like his own private checking account. She just put up with it, since she honestly had no clue how to set boundaries, and her inner circle certainly wasn't helping her start. The couple legally split in March of 1935. The disastrous union barely lasted 2 years. Factoring in the upfront marriage payout and his reckless shopping, the guy drained well over $2 million. To the average Joe, that kind of cash would sound absolutely mind-blowing, but it was basically pocket change compared to the Woolworth empire. The true destruction went deeper, setting off a horrific, lifelong cycle. Elite guys, or at least dudes desperate to strike it rich, constantly chased after her. She invariably gave in, and the guys always walked away, loaded. Just 5 months post-split, Alexis died. On August 1st, 1935, his luxury car swerved off a tight stretch of highway out in Catalonia, Spain, right by Albans. He was flying toward a train depot, riding shotgun with Baroness Maud von Thyssen, wife of a German business mogul. The vehicle smashed into a trunk and flipped, taking his life instantly. His passenger barely survived with horrific wounds. He was 27, but his ex-wife was already moving on. A few days after officially cutting ties with M. Divani, she accepted another proposal from Danish Count Kurt Haugwitz Reventlow. Turns this catch was significantly more toxic. Chapter 5. The nobleman who completely destroyed her. Barbara tied the knot with Count Kurt Haugwitz Reventlow in 1935. Rumors claim she walked down the aisle just 24 hours post-divorce, while others say it took a week. Regardless, the incredibly fast turnaround was wild. At 22 years old, she was somehow already locking down spouse number 2. She handed Reventlow $1.5 million prior to the ceremony, feeling way more like a purchase price than a wedding gift. The towering Danish aristocrat was incredibly manipulative, sporting an aggressive streak right out of the gate. While M. Divani was a sweet-talking moocher, this guy was pure evil. He completely dominated Barbara, using intense fear tactics, nasty verbal abuse, and escalating physical assaults. Things got so bad during one terrifying incident that she ended up hospitalized. London authorities handcuffed him for threatening serious bodily harm. Law enforcement files even noted he promised to shoot some anonymous guy in Barbara's friend group. Their baby boy Lance arrived in London on the 24th of February, 1936. Newspapers dubbed the infant the wealthiest child on earth, though the complicated birth almost cost Barbara her life. That child eventually grew into the absolute center of her entire universe, even if her parenting skills ultimately mirrored the same severe shortcomings her own dad showed while bringing her up. During December of 1937, Barbara marched into a New York federal building and officially signed away her United States citizenship. Revent heavily pressured her into the move to supposedly lower her taxes, though insiders fully understood the actual driving force behind the decision, which was entirely about dodging American estate taxes on 2/3 of her massive fortune if she suddenly passed away. Passing away as a stateside citizen meant federal authorities would seize the lion's share of those funds before Reventlow and their boy saw a dime. Holding Danish status allowed that inheritance to transfer smoothly to her family without facing massive governmental roadblocks. Public backlash was absolutely brutal. Commentator Walter Winchell took to the airwaves, labeling her the most spoiled brat in high society. Reporters at the New York Times went so far as to brand her actions completely reprehensible. Within 48 hours of her sailing off to Europe, 3 New York Woolworth locations shut down, while 36 more faced that exact same danger. Desperate workers sent telegrams to her ship, begging her to force corporate bosses into paying decent salaries to the thousands barely surviving on pennies. Getting absolutely no reply from her, They watched as she simply retained crisis managers to patch up her severely ruined reputation instead. That nationality controversy marked the exact turning point where the United States public completely wrote off Barbara Hutton forever. Her lavish coming-out party sparked deep bitterness, while tying the knot with Medavani turned her into a national laughingstock. However, officially abandoning her home country transformed her image into something basically matching a national betrayer. Taking a fortune built on the backs of everyday laborers, she then completely turned her back on the very nation that provided it. The public totally ignored how her abusive husband forced this choice. Meanwhile, Barbara heavily abused prescription pills and basically stopped consuming meals entirely. That severe starvation cycle, triggered by Mindivani being so cruel on their honeymoon, had cemented into a permanent and clinical medical nightmare. She continued fighting that terrible illness every single day for the next 40 years she remained alive. Medical professionals eventually classified this condition as a desperate plea for the parental love completely missing from her youth. Regardless of its exact roots, the disease ravaged her body so severely that those physical damages could never be undone. Barbara and Reventlow split up during 1938, prompting him to seek $5 million alongside total guardianship over Lance. That nasty courtroom war stalled across both Denmark and the United States for years, keeping the marriage legally binding until 1941. A judge granted Revent short-term parental rights at first, though Barbara managed to win her boy back by 1945. The nobleman found a new wife and quietly vanished from the spotlight before eventually passing away during 1969. Whenever Barbara mentioned him afterward, she sounded absolutely terrified. Chapter 6. Winfield House. Long before Barbara Hutton ever developed that specific property, the grounds boasted roughly 200 years of deep British heritage. Tucked away on the western boundary of Regent's Park, this 12-acre property offered incredible privacy right in the middle of London. Back in the early 1800s, designer John Nash drafted blueprints for that recreation area, featuring scores of exclusive mansions. Only 8 actually materialized. The biggest was Hertford Villa, mapped out around 1825 by Decimus Burton for the 3rd Marquis of Hertford, an ambassador and art fan who threw incredibly huge, sometimes highly controversial parties throughout that massive residence. People eventually started calling the estate St. Dunstan's once it functioned as a recovery center for troops who lost their sight during the First World War. The nonprofit running that medical facility held on to the moniker way after those injured veterans finally moved out. During the 1920s, the structure heavily deteriorated, and a devastating 1936 blaze wiped out almost everything left standing. Barbara and Rentlow bought the ruined lot that exact same year. Then, on the 10th of August, 1936, royal property officials officially gave them the green light to tear down the historic ruins and construct a brand new home. Barbara brought in Wimper Simpson and Guthrie to handle the architectural planning for her upcoming estate. Leonard Rome Guthrie spearheaded the project, using his Glasgow School of Art background to design a massive neo-Georgian residence. He envisioned crimson masonry highlighted by Portland stone details, topped off with a sleek slate mansard roof, and an entryway flanked by classic pillars, while the main exterior spanned an impressive 13 bays in width. The interior spaces were built massive enough for ambassadorial galas, even if nobody predicted they'd actually serve that function back then. Construction dragged on for 15 months. Crews wrapped up the job in January of 1938, and Barbara christened it Winfield House, to honor her grandpa, Frank Winfield Woolworth. The surrounding landscaping turned out completely breathtaking. 12 acres of hidden botanical spaces smack in downtown London, boasting lush grass, statue galleries, and shaded walking trails. Coming in right behind Buckingham Palace, this massive property claimed the runner-up spot for central London's largest private yard. Yet, she rarely found a spare second to actually enjoy the grounds. By 1939, her relationship with Reventlow had completely crumbled as global conflict threatened to engulf Europe. Consequently, Barbara packed up with Lance and relocated to the sunny California coast. Her mansion was left completely vacant. Once the conflict broke out, The Royal Air Force officially took over this sprawling estate to house a barrage balloon division. Military officers transformed the interior into a casual hangout spot. They kicked a soccer ball across the massive lawn and famously dubbed their squad Barbara's Own. The ensuing battle ravaged Winfield House, just like it destroyed countless other parts of London. Upon Barbara making her way back once the combat finally ceased, the heiress discovered warped wooden floors, stripping paint, broken glass panes, and exposed power lines dangling haphazardly right out of the overhead plaster. This stunning residence, she originally constructed 7 years prior, now appeared as if it had sat totally deserted for decades on end. Standing right there in the main foyer, she reached a sudden conclusion that completely shocked absolutely every single person in her inner circle. Reaching out to her attorney back in New York via telephone, she instructed the man to simply hand the entire property over to the United States government. The asking rate was a mere $1. President Harry Truman graciously received the generous donation through an intimately penned correspondence. Following a massive restoration project, the building was officially transformed into the primary dwelling for the United States ambassador to the Court of St. James in 1955. The estate has maintained this exact diplomatic role to this very day. Bipartisan representatives have regularly entertained sitting presidents, top state premiers, and global leaders right inside those very same halls where Barbara Hutton previously roamed, alongside a Danish nobleman she simply struggled to endure. Ultimately, this massive structure easily outlived every other asset she possessed. To this day, the building remains upright and fully operational, while permanently bearing the moniker of a humble merchant who once peddled cheap trinkets out of open displays in a little town named Lancaster. Chapter 7. Cash and Cary. Gossip columnists were already having a total field day long before the couple even mailed out their wedding invites, as whispers began circulating throughout 1942, claiming that Barbara Hutton had started dating Cary Grant. The tabloids mashed their names together to coin the catchy phrase, cash and Cary. Yet, in a rare twist, this specific punchline got the narrative completely backwards. Archibald Alexander Leach originally entered the world on the 18th of January, 1904, growing up in a blue-collar neighborhood known as Horfield over in Bristol, England. His dad ironed garments inside a local textile plant. Meanwhile, his mom, Elsie, completely vanished from his daily life right when the kid turned 9. Elias simply informed his son that the woman had traveled far off. However, the grim reality revealed that Elsie had actually been institutionalized inside a regional psychiatric ward. Elias had actually signed those medical documents himself. As a result, Archie spent his childhood fully convinced that his mom had willingly abandoned him. Running away at 14, he joined a traveling gymnastics crew managed by an entertainer named Bob Pender. This performance squad eventually sailed over to New York in 1920. Young Leach decided to stick around while his crew sailed back home. Bouncing around vaudeville gigs, he swapped out his birth name and eventually hit Hollywood by the early 1930s. Within 5 short years, he cemented his status as one of the absolute wealthiest leading men in the entire entertainment industry. Yet those gritty survival traits from his rough Horfield upbringing never truly faded away. The actor personally handled his own business deals while tracking every single dollar with obsessive precision. Barbara and Cary were initially linked up by Dorothy D. Frazzo, an American countess who effortlessly bounced between the glamorous Hollywood scene and wealthy European nobles. The pair initially crossed paths during an evening banquet hosted out in Los Angeles over the summer of 1941. Having just escaped the Reventlow disaster, Barbara appeared incredibly frail, totally drained, and intensely suspicious of any guy chasing after her massive fortune. Grant desired absolutely nothing that her wealth could buy. At the time, he was raking in over $300,000 annually. He literally could not care less about her trust fund, and his total lack of financial motivation genuinely threw her off balance. They officially tied the knot on the 8th of July, 1942, throwing the ceremony at the personal residence of Grant's agent, Frank Vincent, situated near Lake Arrowhead up in the San Bernardino Mountains. Totally blocked from attending for a change, Journalists simply made up for it by printing wild gossip. Heather Hopper famously dubbed their union the single most fascinating social experiment across Hollywood. For a rather brief stretch, the newlyweds genuinely seemed perfectly content. They frequently spent their evenings relaxing quietly at home. Grant showed incredible tenderness toward Lance, reportedly standing out as the solitary spouse in Barbara's romantic history who treated the kid with authentic warmth. After spending ages surrounded by guys who viewed her entirely as a walking bank account, Barbara found herself partnered with a self-made man possessing his own separate fortune, independent fame, and absolutely zero need to tap into hers. Ironically, the exact contrasting traits that initially drew the pair together ultimately became the glaring cracks that destroyed their marriage. Grant operated as a highly disciplined and regimented man. He woke up at the crack of dawn, enjoyed incredibly basic meals, and demanded strict daily organization. Meanwhile, Barbara completely ignored any sense of routine. She slept until midday, practically starved herself, and threw her cash around with a reckless generosity that left him utterly bewildered. She once casually handed a random hotel housekeeper an expensive mink coat. Grant did not view this action as sweet or caring at all. He simply considered it gross wastefulness. The ongoing global conflict only widened their divide. Grant threw all his energy into hosting patriotic financial drives and performing at charity stage shows. Conversely, Barbara lacked any meaningful public role. Technically, she was now an alien citizen residing inside a nation she had legally denounced a full 5 years prior. She could easily bankroll humanitarian charities, but actively participating on the front lines would only remind the general public about her controversial citizenship renunciation. The couple ultimately separated in 1944. Their official legal split was completely wrapped up by the 30th of August, 1945. Barbara tried offering Grant a massive financial settlement, but he firmly refused the cash. Instead, he handed back all the shiny jewelry and extravagant presents she had bought him throughout their relationship. Questioned by reporters regarding their split, his sole response was hoping for her continued happiness. Not a single bad remark came from her end either. Out of her 7 spouses, Cary Grant remained the lone partner who didn't drain Barbara Hutton's wealth. Gossip columns suggested a financial motive, yet the actual truth proved entirely contrary. Chapter 8. The Ladies' Man and the Royals. From 1947 to 1966, Barbara Hutton tied the knot 4 additional times. Every consecutive marriage ended quicker. Prince Igor Trubetskoy, an artist hailing from Lithuania, possessed average painting skills but exceptional handsomeness. Their 1947 Swiss wedding started off well, with him happily painting away daily as Barbara organized their high society gatherings. Boredom eventually struck, leading him toward competitive driving, culminating in his 1954 Targa Florio victory in Sicily. By then, the romance had been dead for 3 years following their 1951 split. Taking an alleged payout, Trubetskoy vanished without causing drama. Fio Rubio Rosa, however, never exited any situation gracefully. This striking Dominican ex-athlete and political envoy mostly excelled at one specific thing: charming, outrageously rich ladies. His past spouses included a Caribbean tyrant's kid, the famous French cinema star Danielle Darrieux, and eventually Doris Duke, that famous tobacco heiress who supposedly handed over $1 million alongside numerous polo ponies upon their breakup. Wearing his notorious track record like a badge of honor, he wed Barbara on December 30th, 1953. Dressed in mourning colors and weighing under 90 pounds, she had predetermined the arrangement, allegedly gifting him a coffee plantation, multiple riding horses, a repurposed military plane, plus financial handouts roughly between $2 and $3 million. They barely made it 53 days as husband and wife, maybe 73. Wrapping things up before winter even finished. The real shocker for hardened critics? Barbara seemingly understood exactly who Rubar Roa was long before exchanging their vows. After all, She personally witnessed his exact same hustle with Doris Duke. A mutual friend noted afterward that genuine romance wasn't why she walked down the aisle with him. Exhaustion simply won out. She gave up hoping her next relationship might actually break the toxic pattern. Baron Gottfried von Krah broke the mold, just lacking what she truly required. The retired sports star played 2 Wimbledon championships during the 1930s. World War II saw him locked behind bars in Germany, found guilty under statutes outlawing same-sex relationships. Getting out, he reconstructed his entire world with that signature athletic grace. 1955 marked his wedding to Barbara. They shared a genuinely warm partnership, thanks to von Krah's kindness. Yet, as he eventually admitted himself, fulfilling her deepest desires proved impossible. 1959 brought their separation. His platonic friendship endured. Husband number 7, Prince Duan Vinh Nachasak, was an artsy Laotian Vietnamese guy she wed in 1964. A soft-spoken junior partner, he hovered completely outside her elite social bubbles. Their 1966 divorce hit when she turned 53, ending her marriage streak permanently. 33 years yielded 7 different weddings. Friends constantly noticed her pure, vulnerable optimism kicking off every romance, only to witness disappointing conclusions time and again. Chapter 9. The Tangier Estate. This coastal hub anchored Africa's upper left corner, just 14 miles across the water separating it from Spain. From 1923 through 1956, Tangier functioned beneath a globally shared government authority. Lacking any sole national ruler, the region boasted incredibly relaxed regulations, virtually non-existent taxes, and 0 governmental supervision. Black market operators mixed casually alongside ambassadors, creatives, and money changers throughout the Medina's twisting alleyways. Paul B.S. settled locally in 1947 and stayed permanently. William Burroughs showed up a few years later, drafting his manuscripts inside budget Harbor View motels. Wealthy folks seeking pure isolation found absolute perfection in Tangier. Touching down around the late 1940s, Barbara Hutton instantly saw the area's incredible potential. Snapping up property within the Casper, the elevated, ancient walled district overlooking the docks, she quickly purchased the neighboring building, followed by a third. Gradually tying these structures together, she created one massive, sprawling estate, dubbed Sidi Hosni, an alleged 60-room mansion scaling the slopes, weaving through an intricate puzzle of ceramic-decorated patios and skinny steps, ending in elevated decks showing off spectacular sights straight across the channel toward Spanish shores. Inside sat luxurious silken rugs, vintage dividers, and sculpted jade, alongside heavy furnishings that hired hands dragged upward, navigating those ancient Casper walkways. The unassuming exterior masked an overwhelmingly massive interior space. 40-person banquets happened there regularly, completely illuminated through flickering candlelight alone. Truman Capote dropped by once, later recalling the whole vibe with equal parts deep awe and quiet discomfort. Cecile Beaton captured her portrait on site, having her model a jeweled crown right by an open patio doorway. That particular shot ended up being one of the most widely shared pictures from her entire lifetime. Moving to Tangier finally offered Barbara a level of independence that all her previous husbands failed to provide. Whenever she stayed in London, Paris, or New York, society constantly monitored, criticized, and labeled her every move. Over in Tangier, residents just saw her as the wealthy American living in the Casper, happily accepting her charitable gifts without any gossip. Word has it she financed local community parties, handed out meals on holy days, and entirely bankrolled a neighborhood health center. Kids would trail behind her around town, while she hired scores of domestic workers, compensating them far beyond typical regional wages. People could never quite tell if this stemmed from genuine compassion, or that desperate craving for validation shaping her adult years. And folks nearby simply avoided digging into her motives too deeply. However, living there definitely sped up a tragic decline that had already begun. Barbara barely ate anything anymore, leaning heavily on Seconal and codeine, causing her already terrifyingly low body weight to plummet even more. Toward the end of the 1950s, house guests recalled seeing a frail lady completely unable to walk up her own staircase. During those last days at City Hosni, rumors claimed her staff had to haul her around town inside a carrying chair whenever she went out. She packed up and departed from Tangier forever, right around the middle of the 1970s. Following her passing, buyers purchased the massive estate and immediately ripped out a majority of her custom interior upgrades. You can still spot the underlying framework of that property right there in the Casper, assuming you know exactly what details to check. Those luxurious fabrics, precious stones, and evening banquets are long gone. Yet history remembers that for about 20 straight years, a lady practically chased away from every place she attempted to settle finally discovered genuine tranquility upon a cliff overlooking the Strait of Gibraltar. Chapter 10. The Royal Gemstone Collections. That magnificent crown originally belonged to Russian royalty, specifically Grand Duchess Vladimir, who was born Marie of Mecklenburg-Schwerin, an incredibly powerful figure among the Romanovs. Once the 1917 uprising hit, a faithful ally sneaked the item from St. Petersburg inside government luggage. The item traded owners multiple times until landing at a Parisian Cartier boutique, which is exactly where Barbara Hutton ultimately purchased it. This headpiece featured 15 connected rings made of diamonds, with a single pearl gracefully dangling right inside every single loop. Cecil Beaton snapped a portrait of Barbara sporting the piece at City Hosni, capturing a monarchal, strikingly thin, and profoundly isolated figure. Snagging that famous Vladimir crown certainly was not just a one-time shopping spree for her. Throughout 30 long years, Barbara managed to build up an absolutely legendary personal gem stash, unmatched during the 20th century. She scooped up treasures from Cartier and Van Cleef and Arpels, alongside independent brokers hunting down artifacts boasting legitimate regal backgrounds. She even snagged a pearl necklace supposedly tied to Marie Antoinette, although modern scholars still heavily debate whether that backstory is actually true. Her personal vault contained everything from massive Mughal emeralds to pristine Burmese rubies, plus a jade assortment experts called the absolute best privately held stash anywhere. Yet pure ego rarely motivated these massive spending sprees. Barbara honestly could not care less about flexing her newest diamonds at exclusive high society parties or elite social gatherings. Instead, she would rock million-dollar gems at casual meals, or literally just lounging by herself inside luxury hotel rooms. She constantly handed out precious gems on a whim, forcing expensive rings and fancy bracelets onto buddies, employees, and random acquaintances alike. Somebody she barely knew remembered getting an emerald pin simply for dropping off some flowers, perfectly summing up her usual vibe. Barbara basically viewed her jewelry stash the exact same way she viewed cash, treating both as resources meant for sharing instead of hoarding. Royal backstories clearly meant the world to her, even if she stayed quiet about why, constantly hunting for accessories previously owned by incredibly powerful ladies. We're talking about Romanov royalty, Bourbon monarchs, and mighty Mughal queens. A lady bullied her whole life over inheriting retail money, intentionally built a fortress of artifacts dripping with centuries of pure royal pedigree. It remains totally unknown if she ever actually caught on to the blatant irony of it all. One thing is absolutely certain, though. Those treasures survived long after the messy divorces, the property sales, and the given-away mansions. Her bank accounts eventually drained dry, yet the jewels stayed perfectly intact, completely unaffected by the chaotic lifetime they witnessed. A huge chunk of that stash got scattered right before Barbara passed away, mostly because she pawned items off for quick liquidity. She randomly gifted the rest during wild spending frenzies her managers utterly failed to stop. Following her 1979 passing, everything left went to the auction block. Sotheby's managed the bidding war. Those identical jewels she sported during intimate Casper dinners got tagged, sorted, and permanently shipped off to unknown buyers everywhere. That iconic Vladimir crown, however, was nowhere to be found in the catalog. It got handed down to a totally different buyer decades prior. Chapter 11. the scarab beetle, and the collision. Lance Ravenlow literally spent his entire childhood being raised by a team of corporate attorneys. A judge split his youth between his parents, bouncing him across international lines on timetables dictated by total strangers. When Barbara finally regained full custody in 1945, the 9-year-old boy had already resided in more nations than the average grown-up ever sees. Lance was an introverted kid who found solace in mechanical things, completely opposite to his mom's lifestyle of navigating society alongside unreliable entourages. Motors were Lance's real passion. During his mid-20s, he launched Revent Automobiles Incorporated, aiming to manufacture a homegrown vehicle that could rival the dominant overseas teams on the track. This birthed the Scarab, featuring a forward-mounted motor and a Chevrolet V8 under the hood. Taking multiple local victories in 1958, the machine gained admiration from auto professionals, who initially wrote the endeavor off as just some wealthy guy's plaything. Lance took his creation to the global stage 12 months later, yet its engineering was already obsolete. Racing had transitioned toward back-mounted setups, prompting him to fold the business before hitting 30. He wed film star Jill St. John in 1959, though the pair eventually split up by 1963. 12 months afterward, he tied the knot with Cheryl Holdridge, an ex-Mouseketeer known for her late 1950s television roles. Pals considered this next union remarkably stable, providing the solid foundation Lance completely missed out on growing up. Lance Revent hopped onto a light aircraft departing from Aspen, Colorado on the 24th of July, 1972. Moments after leaving the runway, the flight went down in the peaks, ending his life at 36. Investigators ultimately blamed harsh storms alongside potential equipment malfunctions for the tragedy, leaving Cheryl Holdridge a widow. The devastation haunted her forever, until a cerebral tumor claimed her life in 1983, when she was 39. The heartbreaking update found Barbara stationed in Tangier, where witnesses claimed the shock kept her completely mute for almost a week. The boy she fiercely battled to keep, temporarily surrendered, won back, and erratically parented, was suddenly dead and gone forever. Surviving, the single individual who provided her chaotic universe some actual grounding broke her. She entirely skipped his burial service. Rumors suggested physical sickness kept her grounded, while different sources insisted the emotional toll was simply too overwhelming to confront. Her previously weakened physical state crashed rapidly over the next few months, accompanied by an alarmingly fast drop in pounds. She leaned way harder into tranquilizers. Anyone crossing her path around the mid-1970s witnessed someone looking unimaginably older. Lance Revent left absolutely no heirs behind. His custom Scarab racers currently sit inside exclusive garages, preserved by hardcore fans recognizing them as mechanical oddities from a fleeting racing era. Conversely, his mom's absolute despair produced zero tangible artifacts, entirely eating away at whatever fragments of her spirit were left. Chapter 12 explores the Woolworth curse. Frank Woolworth passed his legacy down to 3 girls. The oldest, Helena, wed Charles Edward Francis Mackin, a corporate guy whose only real drive was protecting his current assets. Middle sister Edna tied the knot with Franklin Hutton before dying at 33. The baby, Jessie, chose James Paul Donahue, an aimless guy born into money. Every single girl inherited a chunk of the massive fortune. 0 of those unions raised kids capable of handling that kind of wealth. The cash simply bled away through the family tree unchecked. They lacked strict legal accounts meant to protect the core capital, plus 0 rules forcing successors to prove financial literacy beforehand. Frank Woolworth dedicated his entire existence to engineering insanely streamlined operations across his retail empire. Yet he ignored all that rigorous structure when handling the massive riches those shops generated. The bankrolls flowed straight to his girls without any guidelines, trickling right down to the grandkids, who lacked any real understanding of its true value or the sacrifices required to earn it. Jessie's boy, Jimmy Donahue, who was Barbara's tightest friend growing up, blew his inheritance so loudly he made her shopping sprees seem modest. He boozed hard, hosted wild blowouts, and flaunted an open romance alongside the Duchess of Windsor, completely horrifying whatever was left of their elite high society friends. He perished in 1966 when he was 51, though his passing barely made a blip in the news. At that point, the famous Woolworth legacy lacked its former prestige, with the corporation mirroring the family's downward spiral. The F.W. Woolworth brand ruled domestic shopping for 50 years, yet their classic 5 and dime format became totally outdated by the 1970s. Massive bargain superstores boasting way cheaper prices easily stole away the loyal consumer base Woolworth formerly controlled. Those exact shops that bankrolled a massive high-rise and an entire empire started shutting their doors permanently. Come 1997, the business pulled the plug on its last 400 storefronts across America and Canada. A trademark famous for cheap merchandise over 3 distinct eras basically vanished completely from domestic main streets. The parent company stayed afloat only by shifting focus toward their sneaker division, ultimately changing their entire identity to Foot Locker. You can still find the Woolworth Tower towering over 233 Broadway. These days, it serves as a residential complex, with penthouses fetching 8-figure price tags. Its historic entranceway, adorned in striking stone and intricate overhead tilework, remains carefully preserved for public appreciation. Sightseers snap pictures, while design scholars take notes. Yet, the brand etched into the entryway represents an empire that has completely vanished from its creator's original vision. Barbara certainly wasn't the sole descendant of that dynasty to face absolute devastation. Her downfall just caught the most public attention. The incredible wealth Frank Winfield Woolworth took 40 years to amass evaporated almost completely in just 2 family branches. No isolated factor explains it all. Terrible relationships, missing parents, reckless purchases, and zero financial safeguards definitely contributed. Yet the main core problem ultimately came down to a very specific, fundamental flaw. The patriarch forged his massive business through sheer willpower, then handed the keys to relatives who never learned basic self-control. Chapter 13. Residing inside the Beverly Wilshire. During her twilight era, Barbara Hutton chose hospitality suites over houses, not due to a lack of available real estate, but rather since those establishments operated exactly how her lifestyle demanded. Whenever she rang the front desk, a voice responded. Food arrived effortlessly without any fuss. The employees only expected monetary compensation. She transitioned from the Pierre in New York over to London's Ritz, and ultimately found herself at the Beverly Wilshire in Los Angeles, practically barricading herself indoors permanently. Back in the early 1970s, she tried reclaiming her United States nationality, which she reluctantly surrendered 35 years prior. Sources claim the request gained approval, although the exact timeline remains a blur. This silent backtracking fixed a choice that destroyed her social reputation, far worse than her string of failed romantic weddings. Her social sphere shrank considerably. Evening galas ceased completely. House guests became scarce. Actress Dina Merrill, her relative through a longtime family union, remained one of the rare companions who still dropped by. Nearly all those acquaintances who flocked around Barbara throughout her extravagant spending eras completely vanished. A handful passed away. The rest basically vanished the second her cash flow dried up. Her physical frame, already terrifyingly frail for a long time, supposedly plummeted past 80 pounds. She depended heavily on an alternating cycle of medical caregivers, alongside a few loyal assistants who handled her prescription drugs, daily food, and the intricate details of an existence now entirely confined to one tiny hotel suite. Reading remained her constant. She sometimes chatted over the phone with former friends, yet the socialite who previously entertained 40 guests under candlelit ambiance at the Casper currently wasted away under her blankets. She passed away on the 11th of May, 1979. She reached 66, matching the exact lifespan her famous grandfather achieved before his passing exactly 60 years prior. Service barely 12 mourners showed up. Hollywood star Cliff Robertson recited her personal poetry to the group. This exact tribute appeared in past stories highlighting her secret writing hobbies. Beside her tombstone, however, those words felt remarkably heavier. Her leftover assets were practically non-existent when compared to the massive legacy surrounding the Woolworth brand. Financial experts calculated that Barbara blew through or gifted away more than $500 million throughout her lifetime, when factoring in modern inflation. Her generosity lacked any real logic. She showered cash on spouses, random people, charities, and basically whoever begged with genuine passion. The one thing she couldn't dump was that infamous nickname reporters slapped on her at age 18. It haunted her straight into the mausoleum.